All right, so today we're going to dive into a really heavy topic.
Yeah.
We're looking at the Oikos University shooting from April 2nd, 2012.
Right.
And we've got, a good amount of reports and articles about this, and I think it would be good to, go through what
Yeah.
happened, try to figure out, what led up to it, and, really get a clear picture of that day.
Yeah. This is the deadliest mass killing in Oakland's history.
Wow.
So it's important that we treat this with the gravity it deserves as we go through this stuff, and keep in mind that, there were a lot of people who were deeply affected by this.
Right. And I think to really understand the impact of this, we need to kind of go back to that day
Yeah.
and try to, put ourselves there in that moment.
Absolutely.
So it was a Tuesday,
Right.
April 2nd, 2012, about 10:30 in the morning
Right.
at Oikos University.
Okay.
And for those who don't know, Oikos University is a small Korean Christian college.
Right.
And it's located in an industrial park area,
Okay.
near the airport
Okay.
in Oakland.
Right.
And, it's a pretty nondescript kind of area.
Right.
And, that's where this horrifying thing happened.
Yeah. The weapon that was used was a .45 caliber Springfield XD semi-automatic.
Okay.
And he had 4 10-round magazines, so that's 40 bullets.
Wow.
And that's, right off the bat, you can see, this is a huge amount of potential for violence.
Yeah. And that potential was realized.
Yeah, absolutely.
So according to witnesses, the shooting began in a nursing classroom.
Right.
Students were there for class.
Yeah.
And the gunman walks in, orders everyone to line up against a wall,
Wow.
and then just opens fire.
God,
He actually said, "Get in line, I'm going to kill you all,"
that's shelling.
right before he started shooting.
Yeah.
And 6 students were killed in that initial burst of gunfire.
Wow.
And a receptionist was also killed.
Oh, my God.
And 6 of those 7 people killed were women.
Yeah. It's a really horrible detail to think about. The lives that were lost, and that most of them were women, is just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And it didn't even end there.
Right.
I mean, he continued firing shots as he left the campus.
Oh, my God.
He actually carjacked one of the victims to get away.
Wow.
And by the time it was over, he had used most of those 40 bullets.
It's terrifying.
Yeah. He eventually surrendered at a Safeway supermarket in Alameda,
Okay.
which is about 5 miles from the university.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
obviously that doesn't end the story.
No, absolutely not.
That was just the beginning of trying to understand what happened.
Right.
And who this guy was and why he did this.
Yeah.
So the gunman in this case was a man named Won El-go.
Okay.
And that was his legal name at the time, but his birth name was Sunamko,
Okay.
which in Korean is Ella.
Gotcha.
But he changed it.
He did.
He changed it in February 2002 because he felt like it sounded too much like a girl's name.
Wow.
He was born in Seoul, South Korea on November 18th, 1968. And he died in prison actually just a few years ago on March 20th, 2019,
Okay.
at the age of 50.
Okay, so he was 43 at the time of the shooting.
Yeah.
Why?
He was a Korean American citizen,
Okay.
and he had become a U.S. citizen in 2000.
Right.
And actually, he had been a nursing student himself.
Wow, so he was familiar with the...
What's the program? Yeah.
Interesting.
He had come to the United States with his family when he was young.
Okay.
He had 2 older brothers,
Right.
and they originally settled in Virginia.
Okay.
But then later, Won El-go moved to the Bay Area
Okay.
and lived in Castro Valley and then in Oakland.
Right.
His mother also lived in Oakland for a time, but then moved back to Seoul,
Right.
and she actually passed away there.
Oh, wow.
And one of his brothers, Suwon-ko, was actually a non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Army.
Wow.
And he died in a car accident in Virginia in 2011.
Oh, wow. So that was the year before
Yeah.
the shooting.
And then his mother died later that same year.
God. So he lost his brother and his mother in the same year
Yeah.
before the shooting.
It's a lot of loss.
Yeah. That's an incredible amount of grief to deal with.
Yeah. And, obviously we're not saying that excuses anything,
No, of course not.
but it's something to consider.
Right. It's a piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
Part of trying to understand
Right.
what might have led up to this.
And it's not the only piece of the puzzle,
Right.
because he had also been a student at Oikos University.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, and he'd had some disciplinary problems there.
Okay.
And they'd asked him to leave a few months before the shooting.
Right.
So there's some speculation that he was holding a grudge.
Yeah, it seems like there's some connection there
Right.
between his experience at the school and what happened.
Yeah. And the Oakland police chief at the time, Howard Jordan,
Okay.
he said that Go was angry because he'd been expelled.
Right.
and he'd asked for a refund
Okay.
for his tuition, which was $6,000.
Wow.
But they denied his request.
They did.
Yeah, an administrator named Ellen Cervellon,
Okay.
she denied it.
Wow.
So that was another thing he was angry about.
Right. So he was angry about being expelled and about not getting his money back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Chief Jordan said that Go actually went to the school that day
But-
looking for Cervellon.
So he was targeting her specifically.
Yeah, but when he couldn't find her,
Right.
that's when he just started shooting randomly.
God, that's awful.
And there are other reports that said that Go had felt mistreated by other students.
So he felt like he was being picked on.
Yeah, and disrespected. So
Yeah.
it sounds like he was really isolated and angry.
Yeah, it's a combination of things.
Right.
You know, personal loss, being expelled, feeling mistreated.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for disaster.
And after he surrendered at the Safeway, he was arraigned 2 days later
Okay.
on April 4th, and he was charged with 7 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder.
Wow.
But he didn't enter a plea at that time. And then there were reports that he'd apologized for the shooting.
He did.
Yeah, but he also said that he couldn't remember what had happened that day.
Oh, wow. So he was claiming he didn't remember.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
And then at one point, he even considered getting a feeding tube
Why was that?
because he wasn't eating.
Oh, wow.
He was refusing to eat.
thought he was on a hunger strike.
Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah. He did eventually start eating again, but he had lost a lot of weight by that point.
Yeah.
It's concerning.
Yeah, very concerning.
And then at his next court appearance on April 30th,
Right.
his public defender, David Klaus,
Okay.
he entered a plea of not guilty.
So they were going to fight the charges.
Yeah, and
Okay.
because of the severity of the crimes,
Right.
the prosecution could seek the death penalty.
Wow. So this was a really high stakes case.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there was a question of whether he was even competent to stand trial.
Oh, wow.
They scheduled a hearing for June 30th,
Yeah.
but it got delayed until October 1st. And at that hearing, his lawyer argued that he wasn't mentally competent.
So he was saying that he wasn't in the right state of mind to stand trial.
Right, and they needed to do a psychological evaluation
Oh,
to determine if he could even understand the charges against him
right.
or assist in his own defense.
Gotcha.
And he needed a Korean interpreter during these hearings, too.
Oh,
And there was one point where he actually had an outburst.
He did.
Yeah, when they were talking about his mental state.
Wow. So it seems like he was really struggling
Yeah.
to cope with everything that was happening.
Right. And so the court appointed 2 psychiatrists
Okay.
to evaluate him.
Right.
And the first psychiatrist concluded that he had paranoid schizophrenia
Wow.
and that he had probably had it for 15 years.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
And they said that that was preventing him from being able to communicate with his lawyer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to understand the legal process.
Okay.
And the second psychiatrist reached basically the same conclusion.
So both psychiatrists agreed that he was not mentally competent.
Yeah. And so the judge ruled on January 7th, 2013,
Okay.
that he was unfit to stand trial
Right.
and ordered him to be confined to a mental institution
Correct.
for treatment.
Right.
And so they would periodically review his competency, every 90 days or so
Okay.
to see if he was getting better. But during this time, he refused to take any medication.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of unclear, how much progress he could really make.
Right. It makes it hard to treat someone if they're not willing to take medication.
Exactly.
And even though he was ruled incompetent, an Alameda County grand jury still indicted him on August 26, 2014,
Wow.
on the same charges, the 7 counts of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder.
Right.
But as of September 9th, 2014, he was still considered mentally incompetent.
Yeah.
And then it gets even weirder. In December 2015, he said he wanted the death penalty.
Really?
Yeah, and even his own lawyers in the prosecution,
Yeah.
they were skeptical about whether he really meant it. They thought it might be part of his delusions,
Right.
which is just crazy to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, finally, in May 2017, he pleaded no contest
Okay.
to the charges.
So he wasn't admitting guilt,
Right.
but he was acknowledging that they had enough evidence to convict him.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then on July 14th, 2017,
Yeah.
he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences,
Wow.
plus 271 years in prison
God.
without the possibility of parole.
So he was never getting out.
Nope.
Wow.
And then, as I mentioned earlier, he died in prison on March 20th, 2019.
Right.
The coroner's office investigated his death,
Okay.
but they didn't release any information about the cause.
Right.
So, we're left with this really tragic story.
Yeah.
7 people were killed.
Right.
3 others were injured.
It's just awful.
And it's important to remember the victims. You know their names.
Yeah.
The 6 students who were killed were Chiring Rinzing Bhutia, who was 38,
Okay.
Doris Chibuko, who was 40,
Right.
Kathleen Ping, who was 24,
Wow.
Judith Seymour, who was 53,
God.
and Lydia Sim, who was only 21.
So young.
And the staff member who was killed was Grace Yoonhye Kim.
Yeah. It's just heartbreaking to think about all these lives that were lost.
Yeah, and I think when we look back at this event,
Yeah.
there's a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
It's just such a senseless act of violence.
It really is.
And it really highlights, the complexities of mental health and
Yeah.
how it can intersect with violence.
Right. And it makes you wonder, what could have been done differently?
Absolutely.
Like, were there any warning signs that were missed?
Right.
Could something have been done to prevent this?
And those are questions I don't think we have the answers to.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
But it's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely.
Especially as we try to understand and address these kinds of issues in our society.
Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge.
It is.
And I think this case really highlights the need for more resources and support
Absolutely.
for people who are struggling with mental health issues.
Absolutely.
Because, if we can help people get the treatment they need,
Yeah.
maybe we can prevent tragedies like this from happening again.
Right.
It's a complex issue, but it's one that we have to keep talking about
Yeah.
and keep working on.
Absolutely. So for our listeners, I hope this deep dive has been informative.
Yeah.
And has given you a better understanding of the events surrounding the Oikos University shooting.
Yeah, it's a tragic story.
It is.
And it's important to remember the victims.
Absolutely. And to continue to learn from this event.
Yeah.
And to have those tough conversations about
Yeah.
mental health and violence.
Yeah, because the more we talk about it,
Right.
the more we understand it,
Exactly.
and the better equipped we are to prevent something like this from happening again.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
And we'll see you next time.
See you later.